Ooh, I like that. It looks brighter and clearer.
Yeah, should remember. I just got to remember to turn the light off. Well, no, you can turn it on. Yeah. That's because he's got the big lights on. Hey, everybody, it's Joe Cioffi, and got a guest tonight. It's our Joe Rayo. He's joining us. I moved the live stream back to 7:15 just so that we could have you on, and they are honored. Just all excited.
Absolutely honored.
In fact, Tom Adams couldn't just contain himself over the excitement of Joe Rayo joining. Also, someone else mentioned too. I don't even know how to say that. It's Jezreelis says yay. Okay, so we are on board here, and good evening to everybody. Hope you had a great Wednesday. I don't know about you, but it feels like this week is just like dripping by.
It's like it's in molasses. It's really like moving very, 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 very slowly.
I'm GM Tree Service and Maintenance. Monsieur Michael Marino is saying hi, as is David Fuller and James NASCAR Fan and Lisa North and Garo Vestas and several others. I think Delvin's on here somewhere. Delvin's one of my regulars here.
Okay.
Yeah, he's here, so he's up in Boston. He says hi too. And Danielo Yakubov and Andrew. I have Melodina. And he's hoping that the new GFS snowfall map pans out. Well, aren't we all?
I have no comment about.
No, I know. It's way out in the long range anyway. So okay, so why don't we get going with what's going on? You know, one of the things that's happening today that I noticed, I've been getting a kick out of reading the forecasts up in Washington State. And I'm just going to bring up the radar here. There's a fairly strong storm that's coming into the Pacific Northwest, and that's producing so it looks like a pretty decent band of heavy rains and down almost to the San Francisco area northward. But I was reading some of the forecasts for some of the mountains in eastern Washington where
Cascades.
Where they have winter weather advisories up for basically 30 to 40 inches of snow.
That's a winter weather advisory.
Yes.
What would they have for a winter storm warning? I would wonder.
Well, I was moving around. I did check in Oregon. I went over to Mount Hood, and I guess their threshold criteria for a winter storm warning is slightly lower than that, because I think it was something like 12 to 18,
right? And
they had the winter storm warning up for them. But yeah, it was just my guess is when I looked at the actual geographic point for where the forecast was, it was. There must be not much, if anything, up there. It must literally be on the mountain peak. So they figure if one person can make it up there, 30 inches of snow is not going to cause a problem.
Mount Hood, Mount Rainier. This is probably the Cascades, I believe, probably the snowiest part of the United States, the lower 48. I'm not sure, well, certainly it has to be. It's even snowier up there on some of the tall peaks of the Cascades, as opposed to, let's say, someplace downwind of a lake effect in western New York or western Pennsylvania.
I would think so. There's not too much happening weather-wise. We've got a little bit of some snow shower activity going on in parts of Ohio and West Virginia and western Pennsylvania. There's a bit of an upper trough that's swinging through there. Otherwise, the weather across much of the country unusually quiet. And this winter, I can remember over the years, you get these occasional days where there isn't much weather going on around the country, but it would be just maybe for a day here, 2 days there, and that's it. We've had a lot of days where you get radar maps, that look like this, where you've got one small area going on in the east of no consequence, and virtually the whole country, except for either corner,
right,
something is going on. I wonder if that's La Nina related.
Sometime, if it's not the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, it's diagonally opposite down and over Florida. They get their share of showers and rain and whatever. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there have been a lot of periods this winter we could just look at the entire lower 48 and see like 46 out of the 48 states are not only just bone dry, but also cloudless. There's not very much in the way of cloud cover as well.
Right. We have, there are ice jam issues going on over many areas in the Northeast, and that's causing some serious flooding problems in some places, and that's going to continue. Meanwhile, you can see on the warning map in the West, you've got a peppering of winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories throughout Northern California, Southern Oregon, and then there's a bit of a gap, and then you move up into Washington State, and you've got some more winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings, and that bright blue in that right up at the top of the state there, that I believe is an avalanche warning.
Yeah.
So we've got all kinds of things going on, a few high wind warnings.
We don't think about that. I guess the National Weather Service is responsible not just for regular weather warnings, but avalanche warnings, and a couple of days ago in Alaska, I guess they were responsible also for issuing a tsunami alert or something.
Yesterday in Alaska. I thought we'll start off looking at the long range, because we've been paying attention to these teleconnection indices here on my YouTube channel. It is a big deal. Everybody likes to see these things, and kind of an interesting run last night because we've been talking about the fact, Joe, that the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, which was a big player in that cold blast that we had from mid-December, actually in some places from early December to mid-January, was strongly negative. And it's going, the models are very, very consistent here. In about 7 days, it is going to collapse below the neutral line, and then on the overnight runs, it really accelerated the negative down over the first 7 days of February. So this is very important. I think it's a signal that we do have the signs of a return to a winter pattern across the eastern part of the United States. The odds of that seem to be increasing.
And the cold air certainly looks like it will be there eventually in the first week or 10 days of February. But one of the other teleconnection models that you have up there is suggesting that we're not going to have very much in the way of blocking, at least in the northern and eastern sections of North America, which means that if we do get some kind of a major storm that is capable of producing a significant or at least a sizable amount of snow, it's not going to be one of those storms that just hangs out for a day or two. It may propagate or move very quickly because there's nothing really to stop it once it moves on through and moves on past our area.
Well, but up until now, the NAO has been really a non-player in the overall pattern. It hasn't prevented us from having above normal snowfall to date in most areas of the Northeast. And I'm thinking that will be the same this time around. The important development overnight is the Pacific North America Index, which we were speculating yesterday about whether it might start spiking up if the models begin to shift the ridge in the west from off the west coast to just inland of the west coast. And indeed, that has been the case during the run of models today. And the PNA index now spikes from being off the wall negative around February 1st all the way back to the neutral line in about 6 days' time. That's a pretty steep move. So that's telling you there's going to be a big pressure change going on in that region out in the west, from lower pressures to higher pressures, that large pressure change. And I wonder whether we'll see that spike even faster and perhaps get up into the positive territory when we see the overnight runs tomorrow morning.
Well, as we mentioned yesterday, we didn't mention it here on YouTube, but we did mention it on your Facebook page, that these particular teleconnections, they change much more radically, much more quickly than, let's say, if you were looking at a El Nino or a La Nina pattern, which kind of develops gradually with time over many days, weeks, and even months. The teleconnections sometimes can flip literally, sometimes overnight, and that's what we're looking at right now.
Kevin Francis just bought us each a Starbucks coffee. Thanks, Kevin, very much for hitting the super chat button. Really appreciate it. The thing with the teleconnections is that they're tied and calculated based on the model. So if the models are volatile, then they're going to be volatile.
Right.
So they're more coincident indicators rather than something leading. It's not as if the teleconnections are out there doing something completely separate from what the models are indicating. If the models change in their views, those teleconnections are going to adjust up and down, but they're still important for us to look at.
Mentally, I'm thinking about the old time, from 1930s and 40s or 50s, telephone operators with the plugs, and they're plugging in, to make a connection. They plug in like 3 or 4 different plugs, and so
the line is busy.
Yeah, and in this particular case, we've got 3 or 4 different types of teleconnections, and you're plugging them in and trying to determine, how does one relate to the other, in terms of what overall may be happening, sometime, many days down the road.
Well, one of the things I noticed today was, we're going to look at the upper air pattern here, and it seems as if, at least off today's runs, that the atmosphere wants to get to that colder place faster than what was being modeled a few days ago. I was thinking about this because there's a lot of similarities as far as how the models are behaving, like they were behaving at the end of November, beginning of December. There's a lot of similarities to how the models are dealing with this. They're having a bit of a difficult time adjusting to these big changes, and you get volatility in runs, and perhaps the fact that we are now entering, as opposed to being at the beginning of the winter when the atmosphere is still relatively warm, we are now going into the middle of winter where the atmosphere is extremely cold. I think you might disagree with me on this, but this is my idea. The fact that we had that deep snow cover in Canada early during the autumn season, which allowed Canada to, unlike the last 2 years, allowed Canada to get very, very cold. I think that has had a continuous effect on the weather down the road. And now, being that Canada is still very, very cold, it's like it's easier for the atmosphere to get colder than it was at the beginning of December.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And it's going to be more with all that cold air, with all that snow cover over Canada. It's going to be more difficult, I think, to break out of a spell of frigidity for any long length of time. We are going to be seeing more often than not, I think, colder weather in the days and weeks to come, at least during the month of February. And every once in a while, and we're into one. Well, we're not into one now anymore. Yesterday we were in the 50s. We've jumped right back down again into the 30s. We'll be in the 30s tomorrow, and probably again near 40 degrees on Friday. And then we'll get this little brief flirtation of 50 again on Saturday and Sunday. And then boom, the bottom falls out of the thermometer once again early next week.
Now, watch this upper air today, because it's interesting how this suddenly happens, starts happening faster. It's you're watching these puzzle pieces kind of move around. So we're at the end of the week and going into the weekend. We have this ridge in the east. You can see there's a jet that comes in from the south of the Gulf of Alaska, then comes straight into the Pacific Northwest. There's some kind of there's a little upper low with a trough up near Lake Winnipeg, and at the same time, Canada's you've got this little vortex that's sort of rotating around in northern Canada. And it's gradually gaining a foothold, and we get this weather front that moves through Sunday with some rain. Right. Now, here's the thing: you've got this trough that sharpens up now to our west. There's going to be a bit of a Gulf wave that's going to come out. We'll show it on the surface map in a second. That's not a bad-looking trough when you look at it. It'll probably be a near miss, but the late afternoon model run wants to bring that surface wave a little closer than you might like.
And isn't this the game that we've been playing all winter, where you look down the road 4 or 5 days, you've got a system out there, and you say, well, that's going to stay out to sea. And over time, with each new progressive computer run or computer model, it brings it a little bit closer, a little bit closer, a little bit. And that's how we ended up with that big storm on the 4th of January. A few days earlier, we were poo-pooing it and saying,
completely.
It's going to be out to sea, no big deal there. And
well, here's that trough in the east on Monday into Tuesday. Regardless, let's assume we don't get anything. it's going to get cold behind that. And one of the things that the late afternoon model does is that it basically just starts overwhelming cold air a lot faster. And as soon as that lifts out, here's the next trough that swings into the east for the end of next week. And this is what a few people were talking about with the snow maps for the end of next week, with a front with another wave on it. That is a pretty strong polar flow that sets up toward the end of next week from the Arctic regions down into Canada and into the Great Lakes and into the Northeast.
A full latitude. A full
Just say full latitude trough.
Full latitude trough. I'm not saying longitude. Longitudinal.
Right.
Of course, there's no such word, so that's why it's not coming off my tongue so easily.
And as we roll through, again, this is also.
I could use that coffee now.
The spiking PNA. You know, the ridge is off the west coast. It's trying to push inland of the west coast, and that's what the models are, picking up on. Now, it might be a little different here for this date run. It kind of fades a bit, but then it pops right back. The other thing I think, Joe, that's important in this, and this was a signature during that December-January setup we had, there was a deep trough right along 160 west, which is about where the western part of Hawaii is. Right. There was a very deep trough that set up there, and that forced a strong ridge to build up along and just inland of the west coast. You have that deep trough suddenly again that is along 160. So there's support here where you look out, at other parts of the globe and how it's going to impact your weather. There is support for this idea of a cross-polar flow trying to set up as we move toward the latter part of next week and beyond.
Yes, and we'll just have to play it out. I noticed today on the CPC forecast, Climate Prediction Center forecast, NOAA, again, with this one division that concentrates on long-range forecasts, both in terms of probabilities, precipitation and temperature-wise, and they still have us above normal in terms of temperature. They haven't yet really, although they're beginning to show kind of a breakdown. They're beginning to show that there's less of the country now, at least by the 8 to 14 day outlook, less of the country that's in line for above normal temperatures. We're still in it, but now places to the west and south are beginning to see that flip or change over to a colder than normal weather regime, and maybe it'll take another couple of more days, and maybe in a couple of more days they'll have us finally in the below normal pattern like everybody else.
When we look at the surface maps, there's that action that's going on in the west. Now here's the east. There's that front for Sunday, which looks kind of weak, but you see there's that wave that develops in the central Gulf and runs up further west on this run. Now again, it's just offshore, but that's getting kind of close there.
Yes. Yeah.
That works out to about 38.5 and about 69. 38.5 degrees north, 69 degrees west, where the low is. It isn't too much to imagine that wind up perhaps being along 70 or even 70.5. You can also see that big high coming down right behind it. This is something that the models have been kind of playing catch up on.
Right.
Every run seems to be getting colder, and colder, and this is a fairly cold shot of air that comes in for the first part of next week. And that low, by the way, wraps up pretty well once it goes east of Cape Cod toward Nova Scotia.
And this pattern kind of reminds me, and I'm like, in my head, I think I have like a Rolodex, especially since I was a big fan and even a friend of David Ludlam, the famous weather historian. And so I remember things that just jump out at me. And I think it was in early February of 1980 that there was a storm totally and completely missed the tri-state area. Didn't lay a glove on us, but it brought the second heaviest snowfall in their history to Norfolk, Virginia. I think they had something like 20 plus inches of snow, and it was from a storm that started out in the western Gulf of Mexico, kind of slid right immediately along the coast up to about Cape Hatteras, and then all of a sudden exited very quickly straight east. And something like that. Well, I don't think this go around, at least, it doesn't seem to indicate that it's going to be cold enough for the white stuff in Norfolk. But
no.
Again, it's still quite a few days away. Things can change.
So now we're at the end of next week. So when that first shot of cold air early next week moves out, another front comes by, much like what we're going to see on Sunday. So we'll probably warm up ahead of that. And what the model's doing with this is that it's got a much flatter look to it overall. Cold air kind of starts overwhelming into southeastern Canada, and a little wave develops on that front. And the GFS late this afternoon. Granted, this is 9 days out, so we know it's going to change, but it's already changed significantly from just a few runs back. If I punch back, I'll go back to last night's run. I mean, it really had this sort of aggressive wave coming out and moving northeastward, and maybe a change at the end. Now it's got a much flatter look to it, which I think kind of makes sense if we're talking about cold air overwhelming everything.
Yeah, but you got to watch out, because again, we're 9 days out, and who's to say that the cold air might be so strong and may overwhelm the system that it might do what I just mentioned with the case.
Right, it go way south and underneath.
Yeah,
and that was a signature during that whole cold blast. We had a number of instances of models showing things. Remember the 2,500-mile warm front,
right,
from Colorado to from Denver to Baltimore, that wound up actually at the end of the day, that wound up being suppressed so far south into the Gulf of Mexico, but that's where the wave developed.
Right.
That wound up being our big snowstorm.
Right.
So you're going to definitely see models change, but I think the bottom line in my view in this is that we are, the seeds seem to be planted, that what we're in right now, which I don't really. We talked about this last night on the Facebook show. I don't see what we're in now as a real thaw. We're still getting cold air masses coming down, but there's nothing to keep them here. They move out after 2 days.
Right.
When we've gone to near 60 on the days that we went to near 60, that was because we had strong cold fronts with waves that went by to our west, which, even in a very active cold pattern, you could have that happen anyway.
Right.
It's not like we're having endless number of days of 50-degree weather with 60-degry weather with sunshine.
But it's all relative, because that long stretch of well below normal temperatures, I said as we started to move out of it, I said once we get to like 25 degrees, some people are going to be walking around with T-shirts on, because man is the most adaptable of all the creatures on the earth. We adapt very, very quickly. So when we went through that long stretch, we very quickly adapted to those very, very frigid temperatures. And relatively speaking, as we climbed out of the 20s into the 30s, it felt warm to us. Now, this may not be, as you just said, in the broadest sense of the word, a thaw or a spell of a prolonged warm spell. It may be just average or a bit above average. But still, compared to what we've been through at the start of the year, this seems like a stretch of rather mild temperatures. Even though if you were to plot it all out, we've had our spikes of 50 and 60 degrees, but they've been very short-lived. And look, we're already back now. We 50 yesterday. We're back in the 30s. We've got at least a couple more days of 30s, and we're looking already early next week.
Right.
Another round of several days in the 30s after a brief winterlude or wintermission, if you will, Saturday and Sunday of near 50-degree temperatures. And by the way, all of you take full advantage of Saturday. Saturday will probably be, the year is not even a month old yet, but so far this month, Saturday may be the one of the most beautiful days we've had for outdoor activities, because we're actually going to have those mild temperatures of 50 or thereabouts, maybe even going above 50.
Right.
But we're not going to have the clouds, fog, and rain.
Right, it's going to be a nice day.
Which is what we've had with all of these mild days.
James Hines had wanted to see the snowfall map for southeastern Canada. Now, that system for Monday, if the model's right, has a pretty big impact on Nova Scotia, with some 40-centimeter amounts or higher being indicated there. And you can see all over much of, this is sort of a typical day-to-day map, snowfall map for Quebec, Province, and Labrador. They get pounded almost continuously. I don't even know what they do with it.
Incidentally, did you hear who got pounded at the beginning of this week with far above normal snowfall? Japan.
Really?
Japan had, in parts I saw, and this is interesting because we have in the news and weather room, there's a channel that's run
right.
on
we do get to see
and
they're weather people.
And they actually let off. I did a double take at 7 o'clock. They said, what, they're doing weather already?
Was it in Tokyo?
It was Tokyo had something like 40 centimeters of snow. They talked about places like 80 centimeters on the island. One of the big, not the big island.
Tokyo's not that far north either. I mean, it does snow in central and northern Japan. They had the Olympics there.
Well, this was a whole nation. The whole nation was anywhere from 20 to 80 centimeters, and that's why they let off with weather. And I said, my God, they don't normally see that much, so this was big news for them. So they too are seeing significant snowfall.
This is the put up the 10-day GFS snowfall map, and usually the way I view it with this is that, you know, at this stage of the game, of course, you got to take this with a huge grain of salt. But rather than focus on the specific numbers, I kind of look at it as that maybe this is where an area that you could say has a higher risk of accumulating snow over the next 10 days. And because of that wave at the end of next week, the way has it modeled, it's got this stripe of 6-inch plus snows from Delaware on up through all of southern New England. But this is subject to huge change, obviously.
I know a lot of the snow lovers out there are immediately drawn to New York and New England and the great area. But take a look, they've got snow, if you believe this, all the way down to Hatteras. Hatteras, North Carolina.
Well, they had it with that system last week.
Right, and down into northernmost Georgia, and even northernmost sections of Alabama. So,
you know, we had that day, was it last Thursday, that every state of the Union, every state in the United States, including Hawaii, had snow on the ground. At least somebody reporting at least 1 inch of snow on the ground. Right. And here's the snowfall forecast for those of you in the West. The Northern Rockies, the Cascades, all getting hit pretty hard, as has been the case pretty much this winter, with some breaks in between, of course. But that is now extending down even into the mountains of California, not all the way down to the southern part of the state, but it gets down fairly far. And Northern California and all the elevated areas, of course, and much of Oregon and Washington get a fair amount of snowfall through this whole stretch. I want to just punch up because we do have my viewers from the UK, and they always like to see the snowfall maps for this area, and not as bullish on these snowfall maps over the next 10 days as what we've seen. Right. Up in Scotland, northern England, in some elevated areas, and in Wales, some snow indicated. The northeastern part of Ireland, but for the first time in a while, it shows more, almost as much of England not having snowfall as having it.
Right.
And at least through this 10-day period, the snowfall amounts are also waning ever so slightly as you move into Western Europe. But it could be coinciding with the change that's going on for the eastern part of the United States, because usually when it's cold and active in the east, Western Europe is not too bad,
right,
and vice versa. Although it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
But
I'm impressed by Spain. Spain, look at that. They've got their share.
Well, even up into northern Africa, northwest Africa.
Morocco? Is that Morocco?
Yeah, this has all got to be got to be mountains. But I've seen some maps over the last couple of weeks. With snows all the way down to Italy, down into Sicily and Sardinia because of elevation.
Didn't I see a movie a while back? Somebody, I forget his name, a politician who was talking about how there would no longer be snow on Mount Kilimanjaro around the year 2020 or whatever.
And does that go on the list of dire predictions that has not come through?
Yeah, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was fairly formidable in politics back at the turn of this century or whatever. But he was telling everybody based upon computer forecasts, and we all know how well they do.
So much,
the short term.
So much for that.
Yeah.
Shelley Studios 20K. Imagine Los Angeles getting snow. Don't laugh, because it has happened.
Yes,
and I can remember a couple of times back in the day when we were young, which was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But when we during the late 70s and 80s, there were a couple of times where that actually happened.
I don't remember. Well, okay, I maybe I vaguely remember Los Angeles. I seem to remember San Francisco more than Los Angeles. They had a day or a morning where the rush hour was completely in disarray because they had snowfall. And you don't think about that. You think of San Francisco as the city by the bay with fog, and somehow you don't envision the Golden Gate Bridge with snowflakes falling in front of it, but that it has been known to happen.
MJM Tree Service, Mike Marino, asking about missing data on the maps. Mike, I think I'm thinking you're referring to the snow maps, because on some of them there was an issue for a while with data missing right along the immediate coast, and I think that may still be the case. I'm not sure what's causing that, but it seems to me that is the case. Keith Smolian wants to know about the reservoirs. Are they filling up with rain and snow? Well, I mean, the rainfalls, the melted rainfall amounts here, at least in New York City, I was just happening to look at the data, running below normal. But I would think in upstate New York that might not be. I think it's going to be reverse up there, because they've had a good amount of snow and a good amount of rain.
Right.
So I don't think there's a reservoir problem up in the source regions, at least where we are.
I will tell you one thing about, we talk about drought, and of course for many, many years we always were hearing about California and the severe drought that they had, and of course that pretty much was taken care of with all the big storms they had last winter. But now there's a growing area of fairly significant drought over in Texas and Oklahoma, the lower southern plains. And as I said years ago, there's no way that you're going to get through a single year without some part of the United States seeing drought. The drought comes and goes in one part of the country, and then another part will get it. And it looks like this time around, my question is going to be, are we going to hear a lot of stories or see a lot of national news stories about the drought in Texas or Oklahoma, as opposed to the drought that was going on in Southern California? It just happened to be that Los Angeles was in the middle of that drought, and that was a major communication channel.
Well, let's also bear in mind too, a lot of the things, California to me is kind of a special situation in that they built homes in places where they probably should not have built homes.
Exactly.
They had wildfires, and then they had flooding from rains and lost homes from flooding of rains. Then they had the wildfires. They lost all those homes. I'm not, this is not a criticism, but this is a similar problem, and you and I have discussed this with respect to the growing, the situation in Florida.
Yeah. Right.
They built homes in places that they should never have built homes in to begin with.
Right.
And wildfires have been going on in the West forever. That's how the forests get regenerated. That's how there are certain species of pine that require fire to germinate the cone, the seeds from the cone, in order for the next generation of trees to start.
Right.
So you got to look at maybe you have to look at how they plan this sort of stuff.
What annoyed me though was the fact that we saw on the national news, you'd see with Scott Pelley and NBC Evening News and ABC or whatever like that, like it all seemed like on a weekly basis, well, another drought scenario in California and Southern California. You see the people like begging for water, and and true, but that happens. There are times that this takes place. As I said, drought will happen in large sections of the country, or be generated in large sections of the country. They come and then it'll go. And now what I'm pointing out here is that in the next few months, as we get into the summertime and it gets awfully hot in Texas, if this doesn't break in the immediate future, we're going to be hearing about a serious drought situation in Texas and Oklahoma and the southern plain states. And my question is, are we going to see as much of mainstream media rush to do stories on that, as opposed to when it was in Southern California and affecting one of the biggest communication centers in the world, Los Angeles?
And not to let the East off the hook, because was it you told me this story, or someone did, about Neil Frank for years in Florida tried to convince the people planning and building along the Florida East Coast to build a little further inland,
yes,
and maybe make the coastal areas golf courses, trees, and and parks and that kind of thing, and that would alleviate some of the possibilities for damage and tidal flooding and loss of life, etc. And his words went unheeded.
Absolutely.
So whose fault is that?
Well, the biggest enemy is time. We do know that over time, such extremes will happen. It's just that they take such a long time between, serious hurricanes down in Florida or drought situations in Florida. But you hear the realtors out there saying, well, it'll happen. I'm sure it will, but it hasn't happened in years, and it'll be a long time. There's no problem in putting a home here, and you'll enjoy it. You got a great look at the great view of the ocean that you have. And then we have a situation like last summer, where we had that was it Irma, I believe it was Irma, and like people scurrying left and right for their lives or whatever in their property.
Okie AG, who's one of my regulars, but I haven't seen him in a while. Good to see you on board. He is from, you guessed it, Oklahoma. I guess when you were talking about whining, he says we don't whine here in Oklahoma.
No, what I'm saying, and it's going to be serious because I know that there are a lot of places, farmland. I'm sure we do get what you see at your produce stores. Some of that will come from out of Texas, Oklahoma, or whatever, and you'll see the prices go up, and it's going to be a serious situation if you're down there. But what I was just saying, or the point I was making was that it seemed like every other day you turn on the news and it's Los Angeles and Southern California, and it seems like in other parts of the country that are going through just as serious, if not maybe even a more severe drought situation, you don't hear about that because again, there's no big news media.
Okie AG, I think this is what he means when we were talking about Oklahoma and dry weather and the drought, and he says at the end of the summer we choose either to shower or to give water to the cows.
Yeah.
Oh boy. What year did computer models come out? I remember in junior high it was supposed to rain, but it remained sunny. This was back in 1990. Just curious if they were out then. We had computer models in 1990. We had a few back in 1980, and we had one or two of them back in 1975.
Absolutely. In fact,
when I say one or two of them, I mean literally one or two.
We had when I started college in 1974, we had the old limited fine mesh, the LFM.
Right, the limited fine mesh.
And the LFM back when I started college only went out to 36 hours, and they did not even have an initialization panel. And then they came out with the 2-dot LFM, which was the new and improved version, which had initialization and went out to 48 hours. My goodness, 48 hours!
And then we got a 72-hour on the primitive equation model.
The primitive equation, the OPE
the
model.
OPE, which became the aviation, which became the GFS.
And the spectral model, right?
I forgot the spectral.
The spectral.
Then the spectral. Then the
we also had a model called the barotropic, which we used to refer to as the bustotropic because it was never right.
Well, the problem with the barotropic was that it was barotropic, so it assumed that what you have at the beginning is what you have at the end.
Right.
So you never really saw, if something was going to either gain strength or lose strength, it never really reflected that. It just took whatever it had at the start and just kind of moved it along the way it had it.
And today, all of you who are online now and are savvy enough to go on your PCs, your computers, and go to various sites like Tropical Tidbits, for example, or the NCEP site, the federal government site, and take a look at some of these models and, snap your fingers and all of a sudden you're out to 315 hours. When Joe and I were, just starting in this business, we used to wait. Literally, we'd be right over the fax machine trying to anticipate with each passing line what was coming out. And we were only going out 36, 48, my goodness, 72 hours. We'd wait on that 72-hour prog, especially in potential stormy conditions. And now all of a sudden it's like, not only do we get it out faster, but we've got more computer guidance models that we know what to do with.
Brandon says, do I think that is the coastal Northeast below average in snowfall so far? I don't believe so. I certainly know, I think from southern New England down to coastal Virginia and North Carolina, some places there have gotten already a season's worth of snow, depending on what location you have. I know from my perspective where I am, I'm at my average snowfall for a whole winter is just under 32 inches, and I'm in central Long Island, and I'm already at over 26.
Right.
And we still have, I still have over 2 full months to go.
Yeah. What are the odds that you're not going to get 6 more inches between now and let's say the end of March?
This will be the 6th consecutive winter of above average snowfall, which is never happened, and it will also be the 9th winter in the last 10.
Wow.
Of above normal average snowfall on Long Island. By the way, where I am, actually, the numbers where I am in terms of total snowfall are higher than some of the numbers inland north and west right now.
You probably have had more. Well, case in
the
point,
16 from the big one.
The January 4th storm, I had 6.8, and you had.
I had 16.
See, there you go.
And the other events, you know, we kind of played even with the other events. Maybe you got a little more on one, and I got a little more on the other. But the coastal the big storms on the coast, which have been in a bonanza since the year 2000, have really skewed coastal snowfall numbers up much higher than inland areas. Right. And the other remarkable thing, at least for New York City, is for this area, and it's probably not a fair thing to say for every single spot, but I think for much of the geographic area from New Jersey, eastern New Jersey, to southern New England to me, you know, where I am, this is the 6th year in a row where we've had at least one storm produce a foot of snow or more.
And that's incredible.
And yeah, Joe, you and I remember from 1970 to 2000, did we even have 6 storms in that 26 or 7 storms in that 30-year span that produced a foot or more? I think that's...
Well, I mean, we talk about the Lindsay storm. The Lindsay storm was in 1969, early February. We had about 15 inches of snow. After that, there was nothing even remotely close to that until we had the 2 big snows in 78, the January storm and the February storm in 78, the blizzard of 78. So we went through 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77. We went through 9 consecutive winters without seeing anything close to 12 inches of snow in the tri-state area. And now it seems like every year we get at least one, in some cases 2 of those storms. It's amazing the quick turnaround that we've gone through.
David Fuller asking the average snowfall for Middletown, New Jersey. That's in Monmouth County. I'm going to guess for you, David, for where you are. I'm not 100% sure of how your impact is with the coast, but I would say a fair number for you would be somewhere in the order of 20 to 25 for a season. That seems to be that's the number that kind of pops into my head, thinking back to the storms that have impacted Monmouth County. I'm going to say 20 to 25 for you. Trying to see if there's any other questions that are on here. D.O. Nand Kumar, any snow insight when the cold air makes a return? Well,
tomorrow.
Well,
in fact, tomorrow night, as I said on FiOS 1 News tonight, the temperatures tonight are going to be generally in the teens and 20s, but tomorrow night we're going to see temperatures down within a few degrees of 10 in the lower Hudson Valley.
Spots.
So it's going to be a lot colder tomorrow night as opposed to
the cold part of the equation going forward. I think is the far easier part to figure out than the snow part of the equation.
Right.
Because the pattern is going to be cold by just looking at it. You don't necessarily know whether that pattern is going to be whether there's something in there in the flow that's going to produce a big snow. Okie AG, solar radiation. Let me see. We started to talk about the solar minimum stuff, which decreased solar radiation equals increased cosmic radiation, thus increased volcanic activity.
So what he's doing is he's trying to connect the solar activity to the Earth activity of the volcanic activity, because we said yesterday that there are some scientists at NASA that poo-poo solar activity as a connection with climate, because they said that during the Maunder minimum, the lack of any sunspots or solar activity from 1645 to 1715, they pointed out and say that, well, that was when the Little Ice Age was occurring, and now there are NASA scientists that are saying, no, it wasn't the solar activity that did that, it was the increased volcanic activity, that there were many volcanoes that were spewing aerosol clouds and ash clouds up into space that was reflecting the light back into space from the sun, and that's what lowered the temperature eventually here.
Anthony Orr, is the positive snowfall map working correctly, in my opinion, or in our opinion? I've been looking at it through the winter. It hasn't done badly. It has not done badly. The odd thing is that we've had the snow situations that we've had here for the most part have been all snow situations. I haven't really had to use it in a situation where we're dealing with the possibility of sleet or rain or all of the above. So I don't know that it's been it's gotten a good solid test yet. But on the whole, it hasn't been half bad.
And you know, the one thing that went viral yesterday was that video of the school bus up in Massachusetts that slid down that roadway, knocked down a mailbox, and then slammed into a car before finally stopping. And a lot of people who saw that, I posted it on my Facebook page saying, why was there even school that day? Well, it wasn't precipitating that. It was just happened to be moisture on the roadways that froze up and into a glaze and caused that slippery or slick road condition. When I went out to take my dog out this morning, I looked down at the end of my driveway. I said, what is that? This looks like something was dumped on the edge or the apron of my driveway. You know what it was? It was salt. And at my local highway in Putnam Valley, they had dumped salt on the roadways last night, apparently, or early this morning. I guess maybe they thought, in fear of the moisture from yesterday, doing the same thing that they did up in Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah.
They put the salt down just as a precaution or whatever. So,
well, there was. Did it go below freezing up your way last night?
Oh yeah.
It did, because it didn't by me.
But at the same token, we had gusty winds.
Right, everything evaporated yesterday
and dried out.
Tom Adams, can ocean effect snow 15 miles north of Boston have a snow ratio of 30-1? That's what I calculated early last week on Martin Luther King Day. Temperatures range from 12.5 to 14. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? I've seen crazy ratios in certain situations over the years where I am of 20, 25, 30-1 in some Long Island Sound effect snows that I've experienced. So yeah, why not? It works for me.
And you know that effect also sometimes, not in all, but in some nor'easters or potential nor'easters, sometimes you see the snow break out in and around the Boston area before it even starts breaking out in New York, mainly because the wind comes in a certain direction, just in a specific corridor out of the northeast, and goes over the bay around Cape Cod, and the snow starts breaking out again even before the snow breaks out here. Of course, our snow comes from the broad area, the snow shield that's coming up along the coast from the south. But again, it kind of leapfrogs. He says,
oh, yeah.
why is it snowing up in Boston when it's there's a big gap between New York and Boston? And that's the reason, is they get that wind off of the bay.
Delvin likes the 7 o'clock start time. Okay, I will consider this. Okay, I will consider it. Boston over the next few days, Delvin, you've got no problems. It'll be cold into Friday, and then you're going to moderate going into Saturday. But we'll see what happens with you guys next week. That low develops like the GFS had today. I would think that maybe you guys might see a little bit of precip out of that. But why don't we wait a couple of, at least 2 or 3 more model runs to see if this was just a blip late this afternoon, or something that is going to be another one of these last minute things that we're going to have to pay attention to.
And just for the heck of it, for the kick of it, if you go to my Facebook page, Joe Rayo Weather on Facebook. Again, I wanted to see what kind of reaction I would get, and I did get the kind of reaction I was expecting. I scanned the page from the Farmer's Almanac for their weather forecast, their long-range forecast in the Northeast for February. And for February 4th through the 7th, they are calling for a major Northeast coastal storm with lots of wind. And it's very rare when you see the Almanac actually stick their necks out and mention an amount. They actually said between the 4th and 7th of February, 1 to 2 feet of snow possible.
What, no flake count?
But I put that out there, and I pointed out, I said, the Almanac claims they have 75% accuracy. Well, personally, I'm hoping that the other 25% kicks in, because I really do not want to see a 1 to 2 foot gusty, blowing, blizzard-type situation anytime in February, much less the 4th or the 7th. But it did get the reaction, because a lot of people, making the comments, please, no snow, I don't want to see that. And you got the occasional person saying, go snow, go snow.
William F. asking about Ohio late next week. Now, I got to tell you, William, the overnight models actually had a fairly aggressive-looking snow ice event for much of the Ohio Valley, but that weather front in subsequent model runs is shown to be flatter and weaker, so it would argue against it at this point. But you know what, there's still a week, we're still 9 days away, so let's put that in the aura of, it's in fantasy land at the moment, so it's really hard to say especially if we're talking about a situation where cold air is going to be more important than and overwhelming, it would probably lower the odds of you having, say, a major event, but it might increase the odds that what precip you do get would be in the form of snow. But we're just kind of openly speculating here. Really won't have any idea of how that all plays out until we get at least into the weekend.
Right.
Kevin Trigger, thank you very much for the kind words. Watching and listening to us together, our experience and expertise is much appreciated. Hope you continue to do this. Well, we'll try when the schedule permits it for both of us to we'll occasionally do a double hit here on YouTube.
Yeah, well,
you're always invited.
This is nice. By the way. Well, thank you.
I know you have to come a long way to get here.
No, but usually ever since I got this little device here that my wife gave me, I'm into the going.
Oh, you got to do your Fitbit walk.
My Fitbit walk or whatever. I've been doing that. We're in a tremendously large complex, and we have a very long, underscore that word long, corridor, which measures 650 feet from one end to the other. And so our news director, Mark Weiner, had pointed out to me when I first came here, he said, do you know that if you walk up and down about 4 times, that's 1 mile? And I've been doing that of late, and it feels good.
Oh, good.
So
well, maybe I'll get to join you one of these days.
Yeah, one of these days.
All right, so let's call it a night, folks. Thank you so much. 51 minutes we've been yapping away here. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll try to get Joe on from time to time. And
it's amazing since there's really not much to talk about in the immediate future, and we still spent 51 minutes talking.
Right, so maybe as we get into the weekend and
you
next
wait till
week,
we get into a major situation here. We'll be on for hours.
Yes.
We could do a telethon.
Yes, we could. We'll talk about this later.
We could run phone numbers across the bottom of the screen.
Well, I don't think they do phone numbers anymore. You can just PayPals and things.
All
right, folks. Have a great day and a great Thursday ahead for you. We'll see you tomorrow. And thank you very much for being on my YouTube channel. Also, if you are new to the YouTube channel, it's good to have you here. Don't forget to hit the little subscribe button, which is absolutely free. And this way, when we do these live streams at least once a day, when I do the live streams once a day, and when Joe occasionally joins me, you'll get notified that a live stream is on, and you can come in and participate in the conversation. Thank you again to Kevin Francis for hitting Super Chat tonight. Joe and I are going to go to Starbucks momentarily after he does his walk. Have a great evening.
Ta-da.